La Universidad Católica del Maule, a través de la Facultad de Ciencias Agrarias y Forestales, les da la más cordial bienvenida al lanzamiento del proyecto y seminario de apertura del proyecto Anillos, investigación en áreas temáticas específicas 2023-2026, ANID AT 230028. Biodiversidad de la costa a las montañas, un estudio socioambiental de las prácticas eco-2 culturales de comunidades rurales en un escenario de cambio climático. Saludamos a las autoridades que nos acompañan hoy. Señor Claudio Fredes, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Agrarias y Forestales. Doctor Marcelo Correa, presidente del Comité de Ética Científico. Doctor Fernando Delgado, presidente del Comité de Ética Animal, CICUAL. Señora Claudia Morales, seremi del Ministerio de la Mujer y la Equidad de Género, de la región del Maule. Autoridades, estudiantes, académicos y asistentes en general que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Tengan ustedes muy buenas tardes. El cambio climático representa uno de los desafíos más grandes de la humanidad en tiempos modernos. Como resultado de este cambio, el medio ambiente está experimentando cambios muy rápidos que han provocado alteraciones y pérdida de la biodiversidad. Esto, a su vez, tiene repercusiones en las prácticas socioculturales y las configuraciones identitarias de las comunidades rurales. Es en este contexto que el presente proyecto Anillos, AT 230028, pretende contribuir a preservar el patrimonio natural y cultural de las comunidades rurales en Chile, en este difícil escenario de cambios ambientales provocados por el cambio climático. Antes de iniciar con este seminario, dejamos con ustedes al señor Claudio Fredes, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Agrarias y Forestales de la Universidad Católica del Maule, para que nos entregue unas palabras de bienvenida.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, que estoy muy contento de que tengamos este proyecto. Voy a leerlo porque es bastante difícil el título de aprendérselo. Biodiversidad de costa a montañas. Un estudio socioambiental de las prácticas ecocuadrado culturales de las comunidades rurales en escenario de cambio climático. Muy contento porque nos posiciona, nos pone en las comunidades, nos pone donde queremos estar nosotros. Digamos, la institución, el obispo, dice que tenemos que ser una iglesia en salida. La universidad también tiene que ser una universidad en salida. Y esto nos pone en las comunidades, allí donde eh, están, digamos, los problemas del cambio climático, de la pérdida de la biodiversidad, in situ, investigando qué está pasando en ese escenario. Eh, y, y eso nos enorgullece mucho. Esto justamente sumado al proyecto de la doctora Jimena Quiñones, que está estudiando un patrimonio en las comunidades, nos posiciona, ¿no es cierto?, como una universidad que está investigando las comunidades. Y eso tiene un valor inmenso para nuestra universidad, para la misión de nuestra universidad. Así que los animo a los profesores a que sigan en esta senda. También dar la bienvenida a la doctora eh, Elizabeth, ¿no? Elizabeth Box de Berkeley, nada menos, que una universidad importante, con alta experiencia en el tema de trabajar en comunidades. Y bueno, esperando que combinemos bien. Muchas gracias y, digamos, profesor, con todo el ánimo hasta completar esto. Justamente el profesor tiene un proyecto Anillos y un proyecto Fondesit regular al mismo tiempo, cosa que no sé si agradecértelo o, o un poquito ponerte en el pellejo de poder estar con la de tremenda responsabilidad de sacar dos proyectos de alta línea al mismo tiempo. Entonces, felicitaciones y todo el ánimo. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos las palabras de nuestro decano. Invitamos a pasar adelante al director del proyecto Anillos, doctor Enrique Mundaca, para que nos entregue unas palabras.
Hola, muy buenos días. La verdad es que Muchas gracias, decano, por sus palabras. Bienvenidos. Este es un seminario internacional muy importante para nosotros. Ya estamos en la última parte, ¿cierto?, del primer año de nuestro proyecto y en un par de minutos les voy a hacer un recuento de lo que hemos hecho hasta ahora. Comenzamos nuestro proyecto efectivamente en abril, ¿cierto?, un seminario de apertura. Desde ese momento hasta el día de hoy han pasado muchas cosas. Hemos tenido una gran difusión, especialmente, ¿cierto?, con las comunidades. Hemos participado en seminarios nacionales, internacionales. Nuestro proyecto ha llegado incluso a lugares tan remotos como Kenia, Mongolia, Rumania. ¿Okay? Entonces estamos muy contentos. Ha sido un año intenso. También toma un poco de tiempo ajustarse a la forma de funcionamiento del proyecto Anillos, que es un proyecto muy amplio. Así que, como todo el equipo está presente acá, yo quisiera agradecer también al equipo Anillos. Ha sido un equipo impresionante, increíble. Nuestro equipo y nuestro proyecto es interdisciplinario, y hemos logrado algo que no muchos han logrado por los proyectos Anillos incluso, que es que hemos podido conversar y comunicarnos desde áreas del saber que son absolutamente distantes, distintas, pero cuando trabajamos, ¿cierto?, en un solo problema, que en este caso es el cambio climático, patrimonio y comunidades, encontramos un lenguaje común. Yo quisiera felicitar al equipo de nuevo. Siempre todas nuestras reuniones son fantásticas. Nuestro ambiente de trabajo es fantástico. Hemos logrado realmente, no es por echarnos muchas flores nosotros, pero hemos logrado una dinámica de trabajo muy por sobre lo que yo esperaba incluso. Entonces, ya el cierre, ¿cierto?, de este año, que va a concluir el primer año en noviembre, ¿cierto? Traemos a una de nuestras colaboradoras internacionales, la doctora Elizabeth Berkeley, a quien tuve el placer de conocer en Nueva Zelanda cuando hacíamos el doctorado juntos, ¿cierto? Y teníamos un grupo de amigos. Ella les va a contar unas historias muy interesantes de su experiencia en África especialmente. ¿Okay? Entonces estamos ahora cerrando ya este primer año con su visita. El próximo año va a ser el año de datos, de recolección más dura, ¿cierto? Eso va a comenzar después de noviembre. Así que, bueno, muchas gracias por venir y les deseo a todos que disfruten el seminario y que después podamos conversar con Elizabeth en el conversatorio o afuera en el coffee. Así que muchas gracias por venir. Gracias.
Hacemos las palabras del director del proyecto Anillos, doctor Enrique Mondaca. A continuación vamos a presentarla a la doctora Elizabeth Berkeley, que nos dará la charla titulada One Health Aproaches to Wildlife Conservation in the Rapidly Changing Rural Communities of Sub-Saharan Africa. Dr. Elizabeth Berkeley obtained her PhD in Ecology and Biodiversity from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Her research focuses on reproductive physiology in wildlife, primarily elephants and rhinos. She is particularly interested in understanding how to better manage animals in intensely managed conditions, such as those overseen by rural communities, through the study of wild animal ecology and vice versa. Recently, she has expanded her focus by applying to One Health paradigm to explore how all living beings can coexist and thrive together on this planet. She is currently the Director of Development at Environmental Health Watch in Cleveland, Ohio, USA, an organization dedicated to co-creating healthy homes, healthy people, and healthy communities in Northeast Ohio. We invite Dr. Berkeley to join us on the stage.
Hi everybody, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored that you invited me to come all this way. Part of the reason I really wanted to be here, besides developing new relationships and new opportunities for students and faculty, is to see my friends. And I haven't seen them in 14 years, and it's just wonderful to see Enrique and Mariana again. Our tradition in the United States is whoever does the speaking has to bring the refreshments, which it really annoys me because you're trying to get ready for a talk and you have to make food. So I brought candy. And it's Halloween in the USA right now, so every school kid is eating this candy. And since it's spring here, I brought summer candy too. So what I want to talk about today, I'll talk a little bit, this isn't a research talk, this is an experience talk. I want to stimulate ideas that how we can help develop international relationships. My dream right now, I'm sure we'll have more dreams by the end of the week, but my dream is to bring students from Chile to South Africa to work with me and the elephants. And how do we get undergraduates to have these international experiences, because they've been life-changing for me. They've opened up my world, they've opened up my brain, they've opened up my heart, and I want students to have those same experiences. So I'm just going to give a couple slides about my education and research background, and then I'll start talking about the work I did in Zimbabwe. Oops. So my bachelor's degree is in biology. I went to Hiram College, which is a small liberal arts school in Ohio. It's 1,000 students. I worked for a while, and then I went back to do my PhD, also on rhinos in New Zealand, but I looked at how environmental factors influence reproduction, particularly nutrition and rainfall and habitat quality affect reproduction in rhinos. So I've worked with rhinos a lot, but rhinos are very endangered. There's about, of the 5 species of rhinos, there's about 40,000 individuals left, mostly in white rhinos, which are these here. So it's very difficult to actually do research on them. Most money is just for saving them, for saving habitat, for preventing poaching, and preventing animals from being killed. So the kind of technology I'm interested in can't really advance unless we have a safe number of individuals. In contrast, African elephants, there's about 400 to 500,000 individuals left. So it's a lot easier to get money to do research on elephants than it is to do research on rhinos. So I transferred a lot of the technology I was using in rhinos to elephants, and ended up working with this group of people in South Africa. And this is an organization called Adventures with Elephants. We do research, education, and entertainment using a group of captive elephants. So I was funded by the US Army Department of Research to go do my work on nutritional ecology in elephants. And this is where I'd like to bring the students. So I don't know if I can do this one too. Does this one work? Hello? No.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Hello? Okay. So where we are is in South Africa. We're about an hour from Pretoria, where the vet school is, and University of Pretoria. And then I'll talk later about my work in Zimbabwe up here. So I work with a group of about 12 or 20 Shona tribesmen who came over from Zimbabwe, and they live with these elephants 24 hours a day and take care of the elephants. And what I would do is I would follow the elephants around in the bush, and I would train them for frequent blood sampling. So I'd go up to them and take blood from them, and then monitor their blood glucose levels while they were eating different foods. So I was looking at seasonal differences in nutritional ecology and how that affected elephant health. I can then take that information and bring it back to the US and to other zoos to compare how we're taking care of the animals in managed situations to better feed them, essentially. So this is what we would do. The elephants would go out in the bush, and I would walk up to them and stick a needle in their ear, and they didn't care. It was like being bit by a fly. So we'd just do that. So everything's going really well. I have steady research funding. I have opportunities. I brought 17 students over from the US. We have this tremendous research facility. We have opportunities for students to work with all kinds of wildlife, domestic animals, ecology, water quality. Everything's going great. And the pandemic happens, and I lose my job, and I don't know what to do. So I thought, well, I'll do a Fulbright. I'll apply for a Fulbright. And I applied before and I didn't get it, but I thought, I have lots of time to work on a grant right now. I'm just sitting in my house, and so I'm going to write a Fulbright. So yesterday I talked about what a Fulbright is. It's a program started by the US government after the end of World War II to promote international relations. And the senator who started it decided that we can't have a third world war. We need to have peace. So the purpose of the Fulbright is to bring Americans to other countries and to bring other countries to America to promote cultural understanding. So it's known as soft diplomacy. And we send out about 2,000 Americans a year to other countries, and we bring 4,000 to 5,000 back to the United States. And yesterday I talked about what the opportunities are for Chileans to come to the U.S. and for U.S. to come to the Chileans. You can look at the website and look at the opportunities, and I hope you pursue them because they're not too difficult to get. They have a 10 to 20% acceptance rate. And students can do them too. Undergraduates, after they graduate, can apply for them, and master's level and PhD level students. So this is a way to get free student education in the US, and if you want to get some technology transfer back to Chile, or you want to work with a collaborator in the US and either bring them here or you go there, this is a way to get funding. So while I'm sitting in my house unemployed and trying not to get COVID, I saw this information in the news, and what happened was, let's see if this works. Okay, so these elephants were dying randomly. Several hundred elephants had died in Botswana and Zimbabwe. They were being found near water holes. They were the only animals that were dead near the water holes. There weren't like the vultures that ate the carcasses weren't dying. The hyenas that ate the carcasses weren't dying. It was just the elephants, and it was whole family groups. It wasn't just individuals. So what's going on here? And I thought, this is what I want to do for my Fulbright. This is a serious problem. It's a potentially new emerging disease, so we're all concerned about zoonotic diseases and threats to livestock from wildlife and vice versa. So I'm going to look at this. So that's what I got funded for the Fulbright for. And I wanted to go to Zimbabwe because I had heard all these amazing things about Zimbabwe and how it used to be the breadbasket of Africa, that it has a 95% literacy rate, and that it has lots of opportunities to work with wildlife. So just to tell you a little bit about Zimbabwe, it's an ex-British colony, and it does not have good relationships with the United States. So we have sanctions against specific government individuals that, so we can't interact with the government very well. On a basis like this, we're fine. We can do commerce, we can do training, we can do teaching, but we can't talk to high-level government officials. And even that, and I'll talk about this later, but even that means university administration. So in the university system in Zimbabwe, the chancellor of the government is the president of the country, Edmund Mnangagwa. So the upper administration did not want to be seen or talking with me because it would be a threat to their own career. But with faculty like us, everything's fine. With students like us, everything's fine. So it's also has very serious economic challenges. They just flipped the currency again this year, and last week they declined the value of the currency against the US dollar by 40%. So my colleagues, my professors that I worked with were paid about 150 US dollars per month. Last week, it declined by 40%. So now they're making 100 US dollars a month. Petrol costs the same there. Milk costs the same there. Everything costs the same there. These people are suffering, and yet they still come to school every day and teach their classes, and the students still come to class. Population is 14 million. And in all of sub-Saharan Africa, we anticipate this problem with 50% of the people being under the age of 20. So we have a high birth rate. We have very successful infant survival rates. So we have a lot of young people. And if we don't have the infrastructure to give them educations and to do workforce development and help them, what are these students going to do? And so it's a very serious problem, not just in Zimbabwe, but all across Africa. So I was in Chinoy. So this is the capital of Harare. South Africa's down here, Botswana's over there. And I was in Chinoy, which actually, Carico reminds me of like Chinoy on steroids. Like it's just a very nice, lovely farm rural campus. So we had about 8,000 students out in Chinoy. My project was looking at environmental factors driving health and mortality. I wanted to validate new techniques for non-invasively measuring stress based on some work that was done in bears. I had 4 parks that I wanted to work with, several graduate students, and I also wanted to do capacity building and technology transfer. And that was my timeline. So I get to cut, and they're like, we have a wildlife lab, so you can do everything there. I get to cut. This is the wildlife lab. It's a campus built for a teacher's college in 1960. There's nothing in it but a bunch of 50-year-old plywood desks. And so that was the scene where I was going to build this lab and create this lab. And as I started to think about the infrastructure in Zimbabwe, we have no wildlife labs. There's a veterinary school in Harare that used to be one of the most excellent ones in the world, but without the infrastructure, without the ecological investment, they are slowly declining. So we have all these people who can do wildlife. Conservation is very important. Tourists need money conservation. They want to see wildlife help. We have wildlife mentors. And so I thought, well, this is a training opportunity. If we can transfer the technology here, we can set this up to be a very successful situation. And also there's a lot of funding available because of COVID, because we're realizing the problem of zoonotic disease and the implications for not wildlife and livestock health, but human health as well. So I thought, well, let's further expand this idea of wildlife health to livestock and human health under the One Health paradigm. So looking at us all as one system. So environment, animal, and human health as one system. I can use the same technology that I use in wildlife and humans as well. So I thought, this is one-stop shopping. This is a good idea. So for those of you not familiar with the One Health paradigm, this is how it works. We look at all the different impacts as one system, and what's good for one sector is good for all sectors. And this initially was started by veterinarians. because they saw that wildlife diseases were transferring to poultry. Africa is already aware of using the One Health approach in several different places, and a lot of us are using this approach without thinking about it within this context. So it's easy to slip in our own research areas into this lens. And this is just some of the potential things that we can talk about. So managing urbanization, reducing human-wildlife conflict, looking at socioeconomic inequities, and looking at emerging diseases. So these were the priorities for sub-Saharan Africa, and what we wanted to do was opportunities for new strategies, new ways of framing what we're doing to make it more attractive to funding agencies and to government officials. And we wanted to be the leader. We're this little rural campus, and we want to be the leader in this area. Other examples of universities that are using the One Health approach are University of Guelph, University of Alaska. So it's not a new idea, we're just transferring it to a new situation. And here's some examples in sub-Saharan Africa where we've developed these institutional education partnerships. So the American University and the African University, and examples of cross-sectoral partnerships, so how we balance working with the university with working with producers, and how we interact with international disease organizations. This is a model we came up with for building a One Health lab. So how you work with, if you're working with different species, how you bring samples into the lab safely. I know you have a bio level 2 containment facility at the Carico campus. So how do we manage samples, and how do we serve different faculties with one center? And so I presented this to the university. And what I suggested we do was we have a main center on campus, and then we have satellite centers out in the field, so we can train students in the technology, but then when they graduate and they go out into their professional careers, they understand what we're doing and they can collect samples properly. They understand the importance of using this technology, and then they can collect samples and ship them back to campus. So I presented this idea to the whole university, and the vice chancellor got up and he said, "Thank you, Dr. Berkeley, that's a great idea, you're in charge." And so I was like, oh, okay, sure. And I set out to build this lab. And I'm an American. I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up upper middle class. I have sort of a Disney idea about wildlife, and I love animals. They're very cute. And I live on campus in Cut, and I start relating to wildlife in a different way. And one of the first problems I realized was the monkeys. This is my house. This is every day. It's 35 degrees out. I can't open my windows because the monkeys will come in and steal my food and poop. So, as cute as they are, they're really obnoxious. And the story is, they didn't used to be on campus. They, about 10 years ago, the farmers surrounding campus cleared the fields, cleared the forest for farming. And so the monkeys had no food. So they moved onto campus and started eating all the fruit that had been used for students. They started eating, we have a lot of faculty living on campus. They started eating all the gardens of faculty. They started coming in the dining halls. They started coming in, like these windows here. They would get on the roof, then climb down and come in the students' dormitory rooms and steal their food. So it's a terrible problem. There's 60 of them. They're in 2 different troops of about 30 running around campus. The other thing I realized, which blew me away, and I'm going to drink water while you think about what that would be. This is the trash every morning on campus. By afternoon, this is what it looks like. I mean, it's a huge mess having all these monkeys. And when I got to campus, I arrived in January, and because of COVID, the students didn't show up until February. So I was on campus by myself for a while, adjusting to life with monkeys. And after the students got back, 2 weeks after the students got back, all the monkeys started coughing. And I thought, holy cow, they have COVID. And so I'm like, here's this reservoir where we're constantly giving monkeys to the COVID. The monkeys are giving COVID back to us. So this is a new way of zoonotic disease issue right on our campus that we can study. This is what people said about the monkeys on campus. The creatures ain't doing good at all. It's like they own all the fruit trees on campus. So the fruit trees are for students to eat. Like you had the naranjas here. And the monkeys are getting them first. This one, I can hear the screams of female students as they run from the monkeys outside my house. So these are city kids coming to campus. They're not used to monkeys either, and the monkeys are just running up and taking their lunch from them. One of them got in the dean's office and made a mess. So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's craziness. So this was going to be one of my first priorities, was monkey management and cut. I met with the students. We came up with a plan to, we were going to teach. So this is an opportunity. We're taking advantage of the opportunities available to us that are low cost or no cost. We can teach animal behavior. We can teach ways of animal identification. We can teach animal ecology. We can teach human-wildlife conflict, all by just watching these monkeys around campus. So we set up this plan. And one morning, whoops, where's the next one? Oh. So one rainy morning about like this, I was taking a walk and this dog started following me. And I'm very careful around feral dogs because there's no rabies vaccination plans. There's very poor medical care. I'm not going to let a dog near me, but this dog showed up like this, a body condition score of 1. I had to do, look at the face. I had to do something. So I started inviting her into my house. I had some oatmeal and some chicken broth, and she was nursing, she was lactating, so I started feeding this dog. Well, and I named her Pretty. And she knew a sucker when she saw one, and so she moved in. She gained weight, she likes the couch, and she became an ambassador of animal welfare for the campus because they used to keep all the dogs away because they were afraid of dogs. This little girl would run screaming when she saw us. Now she loves Pretty. She takes kisses from Pretty. So over time, I started Pretty, she slept with me. She went everywhere I went. And then I realized my second year I was there, I had mangoes. I had a whole mango tree with these incredible mangoes, and there were no more monkeys on campus. Just by having a couple feral dogs on campus, we, no cost, chased away all the monkeys and solved this student problem. The monkeys are now going back into the forest, going further away, and they don't come into the student rooms anymore. And this cost nothing to the university. But it was not something that I would have ever thought of. But it was just this random occurrence. So that was project number 1. That worked great. Let's go on to project number 2. Food is a huge issue in Zimbabwe. So as the climate is changing, we're losing a pastoral way of living. We're losing ability to feed cattle. Water sources are drying up. So we need to develop alternative ways not only to feed humans, but to feed livestock. We also need to shift away from the livestock that we're using because it's not sustainable anymore. So one method that has come up is black soldier fly larvae. So my next door neighbor, Robert Musindiri, had started working on this idea, and we decided to develop a circular agriculture approach using black soldier flies. Now you might say, how does this fit into One Health? Surprisingly, it fits in with the UN Sustainable Goals in every way imaginable. So, I mean, if you want to talk about this idea, applying this sort of approach here, there might be opportunities that it might be useful. I'd be happy to talk with you about it and talk about how we develop partnerships to get this work funded. Black soldier flies live across the whole planet. They don't carry zoonotic diseases because they don't have biting, sucking mouth parts as adults. So they can't transmit diseases. They're in your compost pile right now. If you compost, you can find them. I guarantee it. And what we do is we have an organic waste stream. We feed the black soldier flies. We sort it, and we feed the black soldier flies. We then we can feed the larvae directly to livestock, in tilapia in this case, or poultry. And we can also take the pupae, dry them out in a low impact fashion. So we just put them on screens in the sun so they dry out. We mill them into powder. Where's my powder picture? This is the poop. It's not the powder. So this is what's left over after we grind it. We can use that as fertilizer. But once we grind these guys into powder, we can use it in conjunction with other, like we can add a fat supplement to it, like a degree of fat, or we can add a fiber source, like chaff or some kind of silage. And we can feed everything. So our model was, let me just check my slides. Our model was, we're going to collect waste on campus, which we're already doing. We're going to sort it. We're going to grow the black soldier flies. We're going to feed tilapia. So we built a bunch of ponds on our farm. And then we're going to take the tilapia and sell them at market or use them to feed the students. So this we have going on at Cut Farm right now. And I'll talk about how that program developed. Where are my glasses? So we have the approach, the circular approach, validated at the university, but we wanted to expand it into the rural communities. So we wanted to transfer the technology to the people that really need it. And coincidentally with this, USAID had a $19 million project called the Resilience Anchors Project, which focused on building water quality, rural development, and community conservation in, I'll show you the map of where it is in Zimbabwe next. So we went to university, or to USAID, we went to the embassy and we said, can you introduce us to them? And we met the chief of party, Kerry Farley, and he agreed to give us $25,000 to pilot our project out in the community. And I'm just mentioning here, he's a University of Florida alumnus because that will come up next. So this is the area that we're talking about, are these different parks, Gonarejo, Limpopo, Genave, where pastoral farmers have had to move into these areas because there's no grazing left for their cattle. So we want to develop alternative livelihoods for them so they don't need to go and farther distances to feed their cattle, and they don't need to use cattle at all. So that was part of the second project. Along the way, the U.S. Embassy introduced me to some people at University of Florida in the USA. And the University of Florida is one of the largest, richest public universities in the United States. It has a veterinary school, a medical school, every kind of school faculty you could think of. And they're also one of the best funded. They have $1.3 billion a year in federal and state funding. It's just one campus. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. They also really believe in internationalization. They have an internationalization office to help transfer technology and training across the world. And so the U.S. Embassy told me about University of Florida, and they said, why don't you approach them and see if they'd be interested in this project? And so I called them, we had a Zoom call, and they said, oh, that sounds like an interesting idea. We'll send out faculty to meet you. So they paid faculty to come out to the university and develop a partnership. And this is the kind of thing that we could also do here. I mean, I've already talked to them. They're like, yeah, Chile, you know, they'll come down. And we set up, so in July 2022, we hosted 4 faculty. Let me see, this is the guy from the Center for African Studies. This is the head of the Department of Natural Resources. This is a veterinarian. And this is the guy who does environmental water quality. And so he's the leader of our group. These are the head of the medical school at Zimbabwe, the head of the education faculty, the head of the natural resources faculty. Who is that? This is my buddy, one of the, he studies birds, and this is another health science faculty. So we set up this team, and again, all I did was say, hey, we're bringing these people in. Who wants to talk to them? So the people who were motivated to make a change at the university self-selected to say, I want to be a part of this. And we formed this committee, so what do we want to do? What do we want out of this relationship? And what we decided to do was we set up a memorandum, an MOU, to develop research and teaching collaborations. And I want to emphasize that this is not a hierarchical relationship. This is a partnership. We are getting as much from you as you're getting from us. We may be bringing in money. That's the main thing, I guess. But also we're learning from each other on what works in these conditions and what doesn't, and how do we teach students, how do we motivate them to take this seriously? How do we build the future for our countries in a sustainable manner? So we decided to set up an MSc, a Master's of Science in One Health, modeled on University of Florida's program. We, the director of the medical school went to University of Florida via Fulbright he went there for 9 months to learn about how they set up their medical school in health science technology. So it's not only research that we're building on. We're looking at administrative policies or curriculum development or other things. And then right now they're busy writing a grant to submit to bring 20 U.S. students to Zimbabwe to work with U.S. students on 4 specific projects. You'll notice USAID isn't in here anymore. So we thought this would work great. We had this University of Florida alumnus who was in charge of this $19 million project. He wanted to work with us. University of Florida wanted to work with him. COUT wanted to work with him. And he moved to Nepal. He moved to Nepal to do another USAID project. So that avenue disappeared. But we're resilient. That's one of our plans, is that we're flexible and we're resilient. So we ended up carrying on without him. The other thing we did was we brought in private non-governmental organizations into the partnership. I'm sure you've all heard of World Wildlife Fund. In the U.S., we have a philosophy of philanthropy where we all expect to give money to organizations to help them do things. It's just part of our culture. And I didn't realize that wasn't a worldwide attitude until I spent time in New Zealand. And I'm like, how come nobody's funding you guys? New Zealand had this very much number 5 wire attitude where they did everything by themselves. They wanted to be very independent, not dependent on anybody else. They're geographically isolated, so they need to take care of themselves, and they're not asking for outside help. So, these are the things you don't know until you go experience them. But I'm like, oh, we can get money to do a project, no problem. We'll just go ask an NGO. So we approached WWF US and WWF Zimbabwe to partner with us on this approach. Again, it fits in with their mission of community conservation and helping rural communities develop alternative livelihoods by so they don't poach wildlife. So there's no impetus to put the ponds, 20 feet away, 20 meters away, and we grow them in the greenhouse. Then we can move the maggots out to here, to these, so they can expand the volume of maggots we're growing. This here is one of the student employees. They grow the eggs on these little pieces of wood. And then this is the head of World Wildlife Fund Zimbabwe and the woman in charge of sustainable agriculture for World Wildlife Zimbabwe. In every photo, she's got this awful expression on her face. I'm cracking up. She's like, I don't like bugs. And that's part of the problem. I mean, we have to get over this bug distaste. But so we brought them in March 2023 to learn about black soldier flies. So then, now what we're doing is in September 2024, World Wildlife US came out to Victoria Falls. So we've now set up the pilot project in Victoria Falls. So we're collecting food waste from the markets there, feeding the black soldier flies, selling the black soldier fly pellets to chicken farmers. And then the chicken farmers are selling their chickens back to the restaurants and markets. So this is a circular economy. So we're building workforce development for people who don't need a lot of education to do it, and we're building a sustainable system. And this is taking several years to develop, and we had some false starts, but it's happening. So these are the kind of ideas I want to suggest to you. What can we do that takes a while to develop, but we can figure out ways to develop it? So I've talked all about the projects, but I want to talk just a minute or two about the students because I love them. My job there was to develop partnerships and also do teaching. I taught a little bit of introductory biology, mainly evolutionary biology, but I also taught graduate level conservation biology. This was a master's program that started to train professional ecologists in master's degrees. So these were our Zimbabwe government employees that were given leave to come to campus to learn about conservation biology, and then they went back and used their NGOs or their government organizations to develop their master's projects. So I had about 20 students. I came into lecture one day, and one of the students is up there teaching class for me, so I just sat back and watched him. And we're doing Vortex here. It's a population modeling. Do you guys know? Yeah. So it was really fun because they were arguing with each other, and I'm just like, whatever. So she works in elephant conservation. He works in wild dog conservation. We had a principal of a high school there. Just a wide variety of students from different backgrounds. So we're teaching them state of the art so they can go back and apply this to their problems, community problems. And one of the challenges there was the infrastructure. It was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be. And we didn't have reliable electricity. We didn't have reliable internet. We didn't have reliable water. And so I'm trying to teach students remotely. They're out in the bush, so they don't have electricity or Wi-Fi either. So it was not an ideal situation. And I taught a lot via WhatsApp. I mean, we had a group chat on WhatsApp, and I'd send questions out, and they'd reply, and that was the best we could do. So I don't necessarily feel I was successful in that situation, but I learned how we could address the situation, how we could come up with a model that would make that we could get these students educated and successful. So that's what I would like to work on in the future. Another problem that was there was, again, I mentioned the difficulty with U.S.-American relationships. And I didn't have a car on campus, so different people would drive me to Harare once a month so I could buy groceries at the rich store because I was paid in U.S. dollars, and I was not going without my whatever. I mean, and the head of security, who was an ex-police chief, was driving me one day, and he's like, you know, you're under surveillance. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that. And he said, you know, there is somebody in your class watching you at all times. And I said, yeah, I understand that, and I'm pretty sure I know who it is. And he's like, you know, nobody will talk to you because they're afraid to be seen with you. And I said, no, that I didn't know. And I had been really frustrated that you know, I was expecting we would have dinners together, or we would go socializing and this and this and that, and none of that happened. It didn't really happen until my second year there, and it was because people were afraid to be seen with an American. It was not, I never thought, that was not my experience of working 5 years in South Africa. It just never crossed my mind that that would be an issue. So it was mentally challenging for me. I was very isolated, and it was why that dog became so important to me, because she was my very close companion. And the other thing that I mentioned, the vice chancellor, or the chancellor, was the president of Zimbabwe. So this is graduation, and here's President Mnangagwa, and here's me in my borrowed regalia. And when he met me, like we had a receiving line, and we're all like, everybody's saying hello, and he's laughing and joking and being very political and nice and polite and everything. And then he comes to me, and they say, oh, she's an American, she's a Fulbright. And he's like, how do you do? And I was like, oh my God. I shook the hand of this man. So, that's the closest I got to any conflict there. So that's basically the extent of my talk. I just want to show you some of the wildlife there that is kind of cool. These are the locusts. There's my insect for you, Anuke. They're like this big. A chameleon. So there's 2 species of chameleons in Africa. This was one I just saw on my walk. These are some of the most beautiful birds I've seen, the lilac-breasted roller. And then this is a spitting cobra. So they have a problem with venomous snakes on campus, and every year or two, someone dies. Because, yeah, just dies. And because there's no venom, you can't afford to keep the venom. It's very costly. So that's just a cost of being a student on campus, or a housekeeper. And I got up one Sunday morning, and I open up the front door to let Pretty out, and I open up the back door, and I open up the back door, and this cobra goes, and I was like, ah! And I shut the door, and I run in, and I'm like, oh, that was a cobra. And I go and I get my cell phone, and I open up the door again, and the cobra's like, I'm like, oh, and I'm taking a picture. And it's looking at me like, are you nuts? And it finally, it looked at me and he's like, I'm not going to deal with this. And it turned around and it got in the gutter and it kind of slinked away. And my neighbor is looking at me, who is the director of the Faculty of Agriculture. And he's like, Bo, what you doing? And I'm like, it's a cobra. And he's like, it's a cobra. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, get away from it. I'm like, okay. And I push it into my neighbor's yard. So it was just not, it was very different. I had to learn a lot. I had to adjust to this environment where I didn't understand things. And I didn't handle everything perfectly, but I think I handled it well enough to develop this ongoing partnership and relationships. And so I'm going to end my talk there and open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, we thank Dr. Berkeley for her wonderful and insightful presentation. And we now open the floor to questions and comments for Dr. Berkeley. A continuación abrimos un espacio de unos minutos para realizar preguntas y comentarios a la doctora Berkeley.
Hello. I have a very, very specific question. When you mentioned that you were working with the World Wildlife Fund in Zimbabwe, doing the project again with a Black Soldier project, and that the people from the community, they were feeding their own pigs, I think you said, and then they were selling that to the restaurants. Were the restaurants also involved in the circle and giving their food waste back?
So we would collect the waste from the restaurants too. And the reason we chose Victoria Falls is because it is the highest level of international tourism in Zimbabwe. So this was an opportunity to highlight our project to foreigners who have deep pockets and who could potentially support it. So it was very intentional to have this concentration of hotels and restaurants that could also provide the food waste as well.
Hi.
Hi.
Bo?
Yes.
Bo. I'm Patricia.
Hi, Patricia.
Thank you so much for your inspiring talk. I really want to highlight how you perfectly show the good and the bad of the things. And this shows your resilience and also a little bit of vulnerability that allow us to connect with you.
Thank you.
And this is very much appreciated because in science we don't do that much. So beautiful, really.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed how you show us in a kind of a story what was happening, and it felt really like fluid. But I was wondering whether have you write something or an article of the key aspects of how do you develop these successful interactions of interdisciplinary approaches? Because it's, I mean, I'm sure you have key things that you always do several times in order to succeed in this type of approaches. So this is my question, basically.
Thank you for asking that. So I'm a scientist, and this is not something I ever thought about. It kind of arose out of this process, is how do we develop these partnerships? And we do, with the University of Florida, we do have intentions of writing a manuscript where we interview the different partners and talk about how we develop this relationship and what works and what doesn't work. But I think the key thing for me was listening, like really trying not to put my own bias on ideas, but to listen to what the people want. And I think that's what's so important about the Ring project, the ANEOS project, is because they're doing the same thing. Is that listening and going out in the communities is what's really going to drive success of the project. That's it. So I think hopefully we'll get a manuscript out of this. I haven't published a paper in several years now. The elephant thing did not work out because I didn't get my research permit ever, partly because I was an American, I think. So yeah, I'm behind on my research production, let's put it that way.
Doesn't matter. I mean, it could be a book, a chapter, a column, whatever, but I think it's really precious what you're doing, and it will be very nice to really read about it and to learn about your experience. So actually, I work with fungi. But I would love to study you and see the key points of what you do and what could be a reply, you know, like to mimic, you know.
So we were talking about this yesterday. I think as scientists in general, we're not good at communicating our stories, and ANEOS is doing an excellent job of it. And I think we're learning that to get engagement with different partners and also to get engagement with the government and with policymakers and with funding sources, we need to be better at telling our story. And so when I teach conservation biology in the States, we use a book called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And it's all about how you communicate your message to non-scientific audiences. And I want to see if there's a Spanish translation of it so I can send it to you guys. Because I think we need to be doing that as professionals.
Yeah, I would love to read it. So if you can give me then
Okay.
Okay.
I'd be
Awesome.
happy to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Bob. It was really beautiful, actually, to see all the struggles and all the things that you went through in those years in Africa. I would like to ask you something very specific in terms of, from your point of view and all your experience, what do you think would be the main challenge for the communities in Zimbabwe, the ones that you worked with, in terms of climate change? How would climate change would affect the daily life, the interaction with wildlife, for example? So what's your idea about it? What could you visualize when you were there?
So I talked about the USAID Resilience Project, and part of the challenges within the past 15 to 20 years, because of climate change, people don't have water in their communities. So where they once might have walked 200 meters or half a kilometer, they now have to walk 15 to 20 kilometers to get water. And so how do you, and they're carrying buckets back. And how do you, if it takes you several more hours a day, how do you raise your kids? How do your kids get fed? How do you do any of your daily upkeep if you're spending half your day just getting water? So that's what's driving a lot of this migration. And when we get migration, we start losing social structures. And we have all these young men running around with nothing to do, and that they go into the cities, and so we start having more conflict, more crime, just because people are trying to stay alive.
Wow. So migration would be a consequence.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And I don't know if that will happen here. I think we're going to see it happening in the States as we're getting these terrible hurricanes, that we're going to see people migrating. And Cleveland lost all its population because when the automotive industry died up in the 1970s and 80s. So climate-wise, we're very secure. We're a very good situation, but we're anticipating we're going to get a lot of migration in, and how do we deal with that as far as housing and jobs and workforce developments? That's part of what I'm doing now.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. It's something that we haven't considered yet here. I don't think so. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would like to ask your opinion about something I think is a real opportunity for the university. The university owns like 5 or 6 farms.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is in Concepcion, Constitución, to the coast.
Okay.
Can go tomorrow, I hope. This is a land with 300 or 400 hectares. It's not a small size for 2 farms. Devoted today to forestry with pines and eucalyptus,
Mm-hmm.
but it still has a small patch of native forest with endemic species. There are especially 2 plants that are endangered. One of them, we actually don't know if it survives elsewhere else, but it's present there. There's also probably Monito del Monte, the marsupial I told you the other day, yeah. And Gato Huiño, the Huiña cat, which is also endangered. So I think it's an opportunity for the institution, the Universidad Católica del Maule, to engage in a long-term initiative project, also involving local communities, because it's very near to Constitución, which is a medium-sized city, with people needing to go to green areas,
Mm-hmm.
but the city doesn't have any big park, right? So many people actually today go to that farm of the university to, for example, ride bikes or just walk or run. So, what's your opinion? This idea, maybe it's an opportunity for the university. How would you recommend to explore it or engage people within the university community?
So I think this is a great story. This is a potential story to be told. Those little guineas are very cute, and there are lots of women who like cats in the USA, if you haven't heard that lately. And we can provide funding. We can identify a local graduate student who says, this is my community, this is my problem, this is how we can help. And by telling this story, we can attract funding agencies to come and partner with you to develop a program. And what that is, that's not for me to say, that's for you to work with as a community, because the community might say, oh, we don't care about the guineas or the stupid tree, but we care about having a place to ride our bicycles. So how do you solve that problem? How do you have them assign value to the conservation aspects while also satisfying them with the recreation aspects? And that's a common challenge. I mean, that's not anything new. Or they might say, we want a hospital, and so like we do in other countries, we say, oh, this hospital is funded by La Guinea, and conservation of that. And that's how we share the stories. And there's all kinds of techniques we can do.
It's not a question, actually, just a comment, because what Diego was saying, I think it's something that we have a tremendous opportunity here, because Chile is so long, so we have a lot of regional universities, and this is something that we have here in Maule, Universidad Católica del Maule, and it also made me think about my students that I have now, that they are very connected with the territories, so with the problems of the territory. So I have a student that is working in a wetland that is very near from his house, and he's doing something very academic, but at the end, these results will bring something that will allow the conservation of that place, because something very special is happening there. And so I just wanted to comment that is such a great opportunity that we have here in the university.
Yeah, I mean, you are doing this approach.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, but you giving your talk, it makes me like connect the dots, you know? So yeah, it's a comment.
I'm Fernando. And the question is, do you think, or there are initiatives that use this One Health approach, but with all the interactions with animals? I mean, not just wildlife, but pets and farm animals and all that. I mean, like in a global sort of scope.
I think that's actually more important sometimes, except for like COVID, which theoretically came out of a wildlife market. But avian flu is going through the United States right now, and it's I'm not the best at this, but I think it's going into our domestic cattle, and I think there's one evidence of a human catching avian flu either in a slaughterhouse or farm setting. So we need to continue monitoring zoonotic diseases, and as we increase with this human migration, I mean, I came to Chile, it took me 9 hours or whatever. This is how the diseases can move so fast. And I was telling somebody, when we process chickens in the United States, we grow them in the United States, we slaughter them in the United States, we ship the carcasses to China. China processes them into fillets and chicken nuggets and ships them back to us. I mean, it's obscene. But this is a way of disease transfer. So I think there's a lot of funding available for agriculture and livestock surveillance, and I think that we need to be more aware of it.
Right, but yeah, that approach and that what you're saying is like from anthropologic point of view. I'm saying. From the animal point of view as well, can we treat the problem as like one health approach or not?
So I think it's hard for people to look at animals being more important than people, but as we work with very endangered wildlife, we need to use biosafety training and biohazard management to prevent disease transfer. So COVID infected several tigers in the USA in a zoo, because we would never have thought that COVID could affect a large felid. It was a mustelid disease that went to humans, and now we realize COVID is happy in many different species. But so now we are using more gloves in zoos and more personal protective devices to protect the animals rather than the people.
Right. And the last question is, nobody continued your job regarding the infection with the animals? I mean, what happened?
Thank you for asking that question. I knew somebody would. So the elephants, what happened with them? If you remember the elephants, They were dying by the water holes. The theory was that as the water holes dry up, there's a concentration of anaerobic bacteria in the water. So it switches from aerobic to anaerobic, and cyanobacteria start concentrating in the water, which have a toxin that's poisonous to human and wildlife health and animal health. But the only ones who could reach that were the elephants with their long trunks. So the idea was the elephants were poisoning themselves. And so this paper came out in November 2023. They collected samples from 6 of the elephants. One of the main problems of this was people weren't finding the carcasses until 2 weeks after the elephants died. So they've already degraded. Any sort of bacteria would be taken over by other bacteria as the carcass degraded. So what they think happened was this was a Pasteurella toxin in a species of bacteria that has not been known to be lethal in any wildlife, but they genotyped it and came out with this new, what did they call it? It's a, oh, I can't find it. Oh, Biscard taxon bacteria. So this doesn't close the story. They don't know if it came from the water, if it was an endogenous bacteria in the elephants, and they were infecting each other. So there's still more work to be done. But we couldn't do this genotyping in Zimbabwe. These samples had to be sent to Europe for analysis. And by the time the samples were collected, they were so degraded. By the time they were shipped 3 months later, they were further degraded. So this is the best we know now. So if we had a wildlife lab in Zimbabwe with this technology and with the skills there, we could have had a more timely effort. And this emphasizes why having wildlife monitoring and surveillance is so important, because this disease was not transferred to humans, but if it could have been something like COVID, it could have been a much more serious situation. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you for your talk. I think I have 2 questions. One, nobody has asked, but I think we all want to know what happened to Pretty.
Oh, you guys. This is my book. Pretty is going to be my book. The short answer is it was going to cost $9,000 to bring her back to the United States. The comedy of errors it took to get her there, it just was never going to happen. They vaccinated her with an expired vaccine rabies thing, so that cost me 6 months to go back to do it. They spayed her, but they only took 1 ovary out, so she had to have a second surgery to remove the other ovary. I just ran out of time, and I really struggled with the idea of bringing a feral dog who runs miles and miles every day to my house in Cleveland, where I live in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with 4 cats and a dog, and she kills every cat she sees. So she's still alive, she's still out there. Her body condition is good. She's not she has grandchildren now because her puppies survived, and we took them to the farm, and so everybody's really happy about dogs on campus now. So that I feel like that's my biggest legacy. That's what I'm so proud of, is that we solved the monkey issue and Pretty's running around.
Thank you. And one other reflection that I think is connected to what Patricia was saying, and also Fernando, about, like this shock experience for researchers when you arrive there and start working with the communities. We talked about this a little bit at home the other day. If you could share a little bit of the expectation versus reality that you confronted when you arrived with the elephants, the story about the elephants and how people perceive them there, and how you went to, like with your own ideas and biases as well. Because I think it's a nice story that connects very well with everything you've discussed as well.
Okay, so I've worked with elephants and rhinos in zoos for 30 years now, and rhinos are like horses. They're lovely. They have different personalities. You feed them hay, and they're just happy animals. And elephants are much smarter and a little more scary to me, but I trust the trainers. And then I go to South Africa and I work with these trained elephants, which were phenomenally trained, and you could do anything with them. And so I have this kind of fairy tale image of elephants. And so I go to Zimbabwe, where there's no captive elephants. There's much more adversarial relationship with the elephants. And I ask my students, those 12 ecologists, I say, how many of you have know someone who's been injured or killed by an elephant? 4 of the students said yes, their family or one of their neighbors had been killed or injured by an elephant. So when you live in that situation, you don't like elephants. I mean, an elephant herd coming through can wipe out your annual crop. So you have no food, you might have no house because they'll break down the house, and you might lose a family member. So it's a very different relationship. So how do I listen to them? And I'm coming with this attitude of, I want to save endangered species, which I still do, and listen to them and help solve their problems. So a lot of what we do in South Africa with the captive elephants is develop ways of monitoring elephant activity, developing methodology for shifting elephants away from areas. Right now we're working on teaching them with a smart gate. So we have a tower that recognizes elephants, and when the elephants come through the gate, they can open it at certain times or they can close it at certain times, so we can control elephants' access to water or elephants' access to specific areas. So the other things we're working on are bee fences. So elephants don't like bees, so we train people how to, grow bees, and they get the honey from the bees, and that's another source of livelihood. So these are the sort of things we work on. Mm-hmm. And your students could do it too.
Señoras y señores, la Universidad Católica del Maule, mediante la Facultad de Ciencias Agrarias y Forestales, agradece vuestra presencia en este seminario internacional del proyecto Anillos, investigación en áreas temáticas específicas 2023-2026, ANID AT 230028, titulado Biodiversidad de la costa a las montañas, un estudio socioambiental de las prácticas ecoculturales de comunidades rurales en un escenario de cambio climático. Los invitamos a degustar un rico coffee en el segundo piso del auditorio. Y antes de salir... Thank you very much both for your intervention. A todos por su asistencia y muy buenas tardes. La foto, the picture.